Iya ya, buka puasa juga ya.
Oh, the host disabled you to share.
Didi, I'm wanting to share
Yes.
my screen, but the share screen is disabled.
Okay. Let me make you as the co-host. Okay, right now. Is it already?
Yes,
Wait. I think
yes. Oh, yeah, that's fine now, Didi. Yes, yeah.
Okay, James, you can access to share your PPT, right? Your share screen, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can share it. I won't open it just yet. I'll wait for the introduction, I guess, to the class and then open. Yeah.
Okay. So is it okay if we start it right now, or do you want to have some minutes?
I'm okay to start.
Oh yeah, is it okay if we start it right now for the introduction, and then after that, your turn to share your presentations? Is it okay to start it?
Sure. Yeah, yes, thanks, dear. Yes. Okay, just start introduction, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So everyone, tolong bisa buka kamera masing-masing, dan ini adalah wajib, mohon dibuka. Ya, oke, satu persatu ya. Mbak Yu sudah buka, yang lainnya silahkan dibuka. Kalau yang laki-laki nggak perlu pakai hijab kan, jadi bisa dibuka gitu ya. Yang lainnya satu persatu. Baik, alhamdulillah hari ini kuliah Economic Healthy Habits kita bisa mendatangkan Mr. James. Kalian pernah ketemu dengan Mr. James waktu semester lalu ya, di ekonomi kesehatan. Saya meminta beliau untuk memaparkan bagaimana tobacco control yang ada di Australia. Kalian pahami bahwa pengendalian tembakau atau pengendalian rokok itu menjadi sesuatu hal yang penting di dalam kehidupan kita, termasuk juga untuk pembangunan ekonomi. Kenapa? Karena banyak kasus kecelakaan maksudnya, ya termasuk kecelakaan, kasus difabel gitu ya, disability dikarenakan kasus rokok gitu ya. Nah, economic healthy habits salah satu outcome yang akan kita bahas adalah tentang penyakit tidak menular, non-communicable disease. Dalam non-communicable disease ini, salah satu faktor resiko yang paling besar adalah rokok. Sehingga tobacco control program itu menjadi hal yang penting. Di Australia, mereka sudah sangat berhasil dalam hal ini. Mereka sudah bisa banyak peraturan perundang-undangan kebijakan untuk mengelola ini. Sehingga saya memahami bahwa ketertinggalan Indonesia cukup jauh sekali. Oleh karena itu saya meminta, I'm asking James, I'm proposing James to share about tobacco control in Australia. And as you can see that as Australia healthiness index is increasing badly because everyone is not smoking there. And a lot of people, the non-communicable disease was decreased also because of one of the factors, risk factors, is already manageable. But in Indonesia we have a lot of cases concerning for this, and that is why I'm hoping that all of you can learn a lot of things from Australia concerning the tobacco controls. And you have to start it from yourself, yeah, yourself. I know that some of the students still smoking, having smoking behavior, but it's not things that you have to stop. No, I know that it is difficult things to do, ya. Itu susah sekali, sulit sekali. Tetapi you can understand, you need to understand what is the impact in your health and everyone surrounding it. I also want to remind you still, would you mind to open your camera? I still see you still off cam. And I will not open the absent, yeah, presency, unless you are opening your video and I'm the one who will clicking and ticking your presency. You are not allowed to ticking your presency. It's me who ticking your presency. So ensure that you are joining here, opening the camera so I can do the presency afterwards. Oke, jadi harus dibuka kameranya. Lu kan cantik-cantik ini, Mbak Ayu, Nabila, Sandi ya wis bagus, udah mandi gitu. Ratih juga sudah on cam, cantik-cantik loh. Pada malu on cam gitu ya. Mumpung pagi-pagi kuliahnya pagi ya. Jangan-jangan pada baru bangun ini ya. Oke. I will give to James for several minutes ahead. You can share your slide and also some discussion with them. And I inform them there is no attendance list, and unless they are opening their camera so you can see their face.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Better to have that. Otherwise,
yes,
unless you feel very lonely if you cannot see them, right?
Yes, that's correct. I prefer cameras to be on. Yes, yeah, cameras to be on. Yes.
Yeah, camera need to be on. Otherwise,
camera.
Harus hidup. Yes. Otherwise, the attendance list I will not accept you as attendance in this class. Yeah. Okay. Time is yours, James. I will still in the class. Please, James, time is yours.
Okay. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. Selamat pagi. My name is James. I'm from Australia. I'll share my screen now with the presentation, but selamat datang, and I'll share my screen now about the class. So I hope everyone can see that. Yeah. Everyone can see that okay? Yeah. Okay.
See.
Okay. So, yeah. Everyone is okay with that? Yes.
All right.
Okay. All right. It's all right. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll commence. Thank you to Sari, who's here helping me with the technology. Thank you, Sari. Thank you very much, Sari. My name is James, as you can see on the screen there. Today's talk. I will talk about tobacco control policy in Australia and what it's achieved over the last 2 generations. I'll talk about the rationale of why we do implement tobacco control policies and programs, the associated burden of disease resulting from cigarette smoking, the evidence we have to support that. I'll then talk about the overarching worldwide framework for tobacco control policy, which comes from the World Health Organization. I'll talk about Australia's response to that framework, what we've done in Australia, the outcomes in Australia resulting from tobacco control policy. I'll open up to questions and a summary, then questions. Okay, so who am I? I am James. I'm from Australia. That's what I'm qualified in, economics and evaluation, social policy. I work here under the Australian Volunteers Program, which is part of the Australian government's international aid program to Asia and the Pacific. I am a mentor here at UMEA in the Faculty of Economics and Business. I'm a mentor in research and publications, helping with publications to get publications into international journals with an economic focus. My role here is as a volunteer under the International Aid Program is to assist in capacity development and sustainable change for the betterment of Indonesian society. That's the main reason I'm here. That's me a few years ago working here at UMEA in the Tobacco Control Centre, the Muhammadiyah Tobacco Control Centre. I worked there for 2 years in Gedung Pascasarjana, where I'm seated now, and ably assisted, helped here by Sari. I used to work, so that's where I used to work, in Muhammadiyah Tobacco Control Centre 5 years ago for a period of 2 years. Okay, so getting on to our class today, the rationale, the reason why we do tobacco control, the reason why we undertake tobacco control worldwide. Can anyone like to put forward a reason or a few reasons why we need to control tobacco cigarette smoking? Anyone like to speak why we should be controlling or reducing tobacco cigarette smoking and consumption? No? Okay, well, I'll tell you. You can all hear me, I hope. You can all hear me. Okay, there are many reasons. The first of which, I guess, from an economics perspective, which you'd be most interested in, is market failure. We assume that the consumers and producers have perfect information, that they can interact in the market with perfect information for the production of goods and services and the purchase of those goods and services. This is a large assumption, and it's largely, in my view, a fair assumption given internet coverage these days and advertising. But consumers are not entirely rational. They make some peculiar decisions, and they make wrong decisions according to society and their own well-being. So there's market failure, and the government needs to intervene somehow to correct that failure in the market. It's inherent in some markets, in some aspects of the economy. There are negative externalities associated with tobacco cigarette smoking, and by these I mean negative consequences to society generally. Pollution, air pollution, waste management, which I'll come to later. These are crucial concepts within economics and which help guide policy. Secondhand smoke, which you'll all know from someone who's friends of yours who smoke cigarettes, you are also inhaling the smoke from their cigarettes. That's secondhand smoke. That secondhand smoke has particles in it, very tiny particles, which can over time affect your breathing, your lungs, your internal organs. That is a serious matter as well for those who do not smoke, but they have to endure secondhand smoke. So we need to mitigate that, prevent that from happening. Also a rationale, a reason why we have tobacco control policies is around waste management. And this goes to the second point there, externalities. All those cigarette butts that are finished, where do they go? They go onto the ground, which will then end up in stormwater drains, blocking stormwater drains, and then have further literally downstream effects on the environment. Because a cigarette butt, it contains small cushioning, which is not easily biodegradable. So it has major implications for waste management and our public drainage systems. And importantly also is the burden of disease. What we say is your illnesses suffered because of cigarette smoking. Burden of disease, the burden of illness, of lost work, lost income, you're out of society because of illness. So the real burden, as we know, from being unwell. That's what we public health officials, public health epidemiologists are very interested in this burden of disease. That's a very key concept that very extensive data exists on various aspects of disease in society and the community. So that's a light bulb moment for you. Oh, I see. I understand. Okay, thank you. I understand. Very good. I think that's David Niven, an English actor there. I'm not sure. I think that might be David Niven. Okay, so the burden of disease. What is it? Well, it's the study of, as I may say, the burden of being unwell, the burden of being sakit, of being sick, of unwell. The burden of disease associated with cigarette smoking is many aspects of the burden of disease. These are cardiovascular disease, that is relates to the heart and blood vessels. This is the major cause of illness for cigarette smokers, is cardiovascular disease. Most types of cardiovascular disease as well. We result in raised blood pressure because the blood has impurities in it, resulting from cigarette smoking. So the blood doesn't flow through the body as well from the heart and the arteries because it has impurities in it. Coronary heart disease, you can see there that many of it relates to disease of the heart and cardiovascular system and raised blood pressure. Congestive heart failure, cerebrovascular disease, which can relate to blood vessels to the brain, because the vessels have impurities in it due to the cigarette inhalation, the toxins and poisons in cigarette tobacco due to the production of tobacco, and a few others there, many long lists, peripheral artery disease, abdominal aortic aneurysm, and sudden cardiac death. These are serious matters. Now, I won't go into, I'm not a medical doctor. I don't know precisely all these terms, so we won't really unpack those, but they are what we call the burden of disease associated with cigarette smoking, and the ramifications of cigarette smoking. And these come from a very good source there, Tobacco in Australia, the excellent website that there. I can make this presentation available to you at the end of class. Deaths attributable in Australia due to tobacco caused deaths due to cigarette smoking or consumption. You can see there lung cancer. That's the large one. That's about a third there. It affects the lungs, both lungs, the ability of the lungs to take in air and expire air. It's hampers it. It reduces its ability to function, which therefore leads to respiratory problems, breathing, intake and outtake of oxygen, vascular disease, which I mentioned earlier, blood vessels, and other cancers that has downstream ramifications in other cancers of organs of the body. Now, here we have what we call DALYs, disability adjusted life years. This is very important in public health and public policy. We have somehow try and establish or determine or estimate how our lives are affected by bad behaviors that can affect our health. And this we subtract from our life expectancy, disability adjusted life years. When we're born, we're expected to live to a certain age. In Indonesia, it's about 70 years of age. In Australia, the expected life, a child born today in Australia could expect to live to be about 90 years of age because of advances in medical care and lifestyle habits. However, when we want to determine the effects of bad behaviors on our health, we have this minus effect. We have a disability adjusted life years. We subtract from that life expectancy years from our life due to bad unhealthy habits, and one notably is cigarette smoking. And here we have disability adjusted life years for various diseases. COPD, which is obstructive pulmonary disease, the attributable DALY there, lung cancer, coronary heart disease and stroke. These are just a few selected, the top 4 in Australia. So this takes away from your life expectancy in regards to these disease types. These are very important in public health, disability adjusted life years, and there are other indicators as well used, but this one most notably. So the policy framework for tobacco control policy internationally comes from the World Health Organization, a major health organization. I think it's based in Geneva, Switzerland, which I hope you all get to go to sometime in Europe. It's an overarching health policy for guiding world public health. And Australia is a signatory to many of its treaties and conventions, one of which is the World Health Organization framework, the Convention on Tobacco Control. And this was devised and signed in 2003, which is 20 years ago. And many countries signed up to it around the world, this convention on policies and programs to implement, to restrict or reduce tobacco consumption. Indonesia is not, as far as I know, a signatory to the to the World Health Organization framework on Convention on Tobacco Control. It remains, as my understanding, is not a signatory. But that we can talk about more later. I can't really talk about Indonesian public health policy. But it's a framework for tobacco-related actions and policies. And it's also designed to protect people from the health, social and environmental and economic effects of tobacco consumption. There are a lot of policy pointers there: health, social, environmental and economic effects. It's a very comprehensive document, it's a very lengthy document. We're very fortunate to have it in place, implemented, signed off 20 years ago this year. The measures include develop policies on tobacco prices and taxes, and many of these I'll come to later. Ban tobacco advertising, promotion and sponsorship on television and radio and newspapers, and laws on packaging and labelling of cigarettes. And other areas include education and awareness campaigns and treatment for tobacco dependence. Ibu Dia would know a lot about this. So Ibu Dia worked with me and others a few years ago on tobacco control policy with the Muhammadiyah Tobacco Control Centre here at UMA. So they're the measures under the convention. So this is the overarching framework. This is what guides policy and programs in Australia. Okay, the outputs of tobacco control. Now, by outputs, I mean measures that we put in place to bring about change. Outputs, measures that we bring when a factory produces a motor vehicle. The output is the motor vehicle, and the motor vehicle is a means of travel from one point to another, of journeying. That's the output, is the motor vehicle. So the outputs of this convention are the following that Australia has implemented, among others. So the outputs of tobacco control in Australia were, the first one is tobacco advertising, promotion and sponsorship bans on the advertising and promotion and sponsorship of advertising, TAPS bans, we commonly know. One other output has been smoke-free area regulations, banning cigarette smoking in public areas, which you'll know here at UMA, you're not allowed to, you're not permitted to smoke in public areas. And the third output is taxation and price. This is a very effective and complicated measure, but in Australia, it's one that we pursued with great vigour. I'll show you the effects of it soon. Over the last 20 years of this convention, the effects of this convention in these three areas has been significant. It's highly significant and highly effective in Australia, and we're better for it, in my view, in terms of public health and enjoyment of public space. So in Australia, years ago, these photos taken about 40 years ago in the 1980s, when I was your when I was your age, maybe a little younger. These are photos taken of sport in Australia. The photo on the left there is cricket. It's a game played in the summertime. It was devised in England. It's a very popular game in Australia, cricket. But in the background there, you can see Benson and Hedges, which was used to be a cigarette company in Australia. It still sells cigarettes in Australia, but doesn't manufacture them in Australia. Benson and Hedges there were major sponsors of cricket in Australia in the 1970s and 1980s. So there was sports sponsorship there in cricket and football. Winfield, the middle photo there, that fellow there, Paul Hogan, he was a very famous comedian. He was well liked by Australians, a very funny man. He was very well liked by Australians. And you might know the movie Crocodile Dundee. Well, Paul Hogan made that movie, produced that movie, and starred in that movie. So Paul Hogan is a very famous Australian. And he promoted Winfield cigarettes in the 1970s and 1980s. And you have their Formula One racing, which was sponsored by Marlboro Cigarette Company, an American cigarette company. So there was, as you can see, there was advertising, promotion, and sponsorship there in sport and in general life among celebrities and sports stars, sports celebrities. Secondly, Australia had implemented smoke-free area regulations, which you'll be familiar with here in UMA, in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. Many places here have smoke-free areas where you're not permitted to smoke, Dilarang Rokok. We have those in Australia. The third area, so they were the outputs. Okay, they're the outputs, and taxation on the excise tax on tobacco also helped bring about rising prices and reduce demand. So they're the outputs. They were what produced to bring about change. Outputs are very different from outcomes. Now, the outcomes we look at are long term. These occur over many years. These occur over a generation of 15 years, 25 years. Roughly about 20 years a generation. What change have we observed in society in terms of people's habits, behaviors, what's occurred? So outcomes are very different from outputs. So outcomes are long term over many years. So the outcomes are, we banned all of these. Okay, so sponsorship of cricket there in the left-hand picture of the summer sport. We banned that. There's no longer any tobacco sponsorship of cricket in Australia or any sport in Australia. Football, cricket, any sport. Badminton, there's no tobacco sponsorship at all of sport in Australia. That was banned over the course of the last 30 years. And incidentally, I'll add that Australia started on tobacco control before the World Convention on Tobacco Control. Australia in the 1980s started very much what we call quit campaigns to stop smoking. So Australia was very progressive in the 1980s, 40 years ago, when I was your age. We started on this program of reducing cigarette smoking, the prevalence of cigarette smoking. So we banned the promotion of tobacco's consumption. There, Paul Hogan, the middle figure, those sort of celebrities were no longer permitted to promote cigarette smoking. We banned tobacco sponsorship in major sporting events like the Formula One Grand Prix and all sports in Australia, in all aspects of Australia. The outcomes, other outcomes are these: smoke-free areas, public areas in which you are not permitted to smoke. It's illegal to smoke. It's socially not accepted. And there's the expectation that you will not smoke in public areas. Now, fortunately, you and I are now living in a time where we are free from cigarette smoke, free from that secondhand cigarette smoke or inhaling cigarettes, which can be not good for your breathing, and you're inhaling small particle matter. And of course, there is the obnoxious smell of cigarette tobacco smoke. So now we have smoke-free areas in Australia, all areas, on trams and trains and buses, in public areas of restaurants and cafes, in public areas, in parks and gardens. You are not permitted to smoke. It's prohibited. And it's an excellent public health outcome that is well agreed by many Australians, I'm sure. So it's a major benefit of a major outcome. You can walk in almost anywhere now in my city in Australia, Melbourne, or all cities in Australia, and you will not have the unfortunate experience of inhaling cigarette smoke. So that's a very good public health outcome. Taxation, this is a fairly complicated one. Taxation which essentially tried to bring about change in consumption. There you can see major reforms started in 1983 in a progressive government. Major reforms started there 40 years ago, before the World Convention, 20 years before the World Convention on Tobacco Control. There was controls implemented then in 1983. 1999, taxes were placed on the number of cigarettes in a packet rather than weight to avoid a shortcoming of tax policy, tax law. These are some of the reforms over the last 40 years. 2014, there were excise tax increase on cigarettes twice a year, which 12.5%. That's a very large increase in tax on a product, which therefore, if a producer wants to recoup their costs, they have to increase the price to cover that excise tax. Raising the price, as you know, as economics students, has a disincentive implications for demand, consumer demand, and consumer preference. So there are income and substitution effects there, and reduces the demand for cigarettes. And that's occurred in Australia, which I'll demonstrate later. 2014 to the present, we government policy has been to maintain the real price of cigarettes. That is, if prices of cigarettes rise by a certain percent, we attempt to maintain the real price of those cigarettes. So if your salary or wages increase by 5%, the aim is to increase the price of tobacco also by 5%, so it doesn't become relatively cheaper. Tobacco consumption doesn't become relatively cheaper. It's consumer price theory here, of course, and we can maintain the real price of tobacco, so there's no incentive to consume more of it because your salary has increased. Australia, last I saw, this tax burden on cigarettes was about 56.75%. So you buy one cigarette, the tax burden on that would be about 56.75%. That was 4 years ago. It would probably be much likely be higher than that now. It might be around 65%. The OECD average then in 2019 was 74.86%. So the tax burden has been increasing on the price of cigarettes, which is a further disincentive to consume. It also adds to government revenue to help pay for health programs, because many unwell people in Australia will go to a hospital. The hospitals are funded mostly by government. It's a public good. So in order to cover their costs, the federal government in Australia increases the price of tobacco to add extra revenue in order to meet the health costs of people presenting with tobacco-related illnesses. But this is decreasing now over time, because the prevalence of cigarette smoking is decreasing, which I'll demonstrate later. I'll show later. So there are the three outcomes of tobacco control policy. Change that has occurred over a long period of time, 2 generations, from 1983, as you can see, 40 years ago. Okay, so since 1991, in the last 20 years, just briefly, some more outcomes. The number of daily smokers is almost 50%. This was that's people who smoke every day. Years past, that figure was very high. That was around 80 to 90%. It's now around 50% number of people who are daily smokers. Prevalence I'll come to soon. Proportion of people never taking up cigarette smoking has decreased. It's now, I beg your pardon, the proportion never taking up cigarettes has increased from 49% to 63%. That is, the people who have never attempted or to commence cigarette smoking, have never tried it. So there's a great, you can see there's a great public awareness that it's something they don't really want to attempt to commence. There's a unwillingness in the public not to commence cigarette smoking. Excuse me. And the cost of cigarette smoking, a survey has shown that the cost of cigarette smoking is motivating more people to quit or reduce cigarette smoking. It's 58% in 2019. Said that the cost of cigarette smoking is a disincentive to smoke cigarettes. That's up from 52% 3 years earlier. So you can see the price effect there, the cost and taxation effect there occurring on price and consumer preference. This is all very useful model to use in illustrating budget constraints and consumer choice between two products that you would have studied in first year microeconomics and budget constraint. Excuse me. Excuse me. So there are some outcomes just in the last 30 years from 1991, when I was just a little older than you are currently. Okay, the prevalence of tobacco smoking in Australia. There you can see over the years, over the last 40 years, the prevalence. By prevalence, we mean just to what extent in the community people are doing this activity. But this is a very important variable we look at in public health. Prevalence is just to what extent is this really occurring in Australian society? The prevalence. Here, the prevalence. This, as you can see, is decreasing over these years from 35% in 1980 now to about 14%, 13% in Australia. It's very low now in Australia. The prevalence, the people you meet who are cigarette smokers. So in Australia, you meet probably 1 in 8 people you'll meet cigarette smokers. Many years ago, it was about it was 80%. It was about every 5 people you meet, 4 would be cigarette smokers. 5 people you meet, 4 would be cigarette smokers. That's a lot. That's a lot. But now it's 1 in 8 people you meet in Australia, adults, are cigarette smokers. So it's decreased significantly in the last, we're talking generational change. That's significant change in the last probably 80 years, 70 years. Cigarette smoking in Australia, in the Western world, and in Asian countries was seen as a status symbol. But because of public health campaigns and awareness campaigns, it's decreased significantly to that figure you see now. So it's from 4 out of 5 now down to 2, down to about 1 out of 8, 1/8 of 1 out of 8 people you meet in Australia are cigarette smokers. So it's a significantly, hugely successful campaign in Australia to reduce the incidence and prevalence of cigarette smoking over 70 years, 3 generations, 4 generations. And here, just briefly, we have a slide on the secondhand smoke that I was talking about earlier. It's very important. This affects children and housekeepers, wives. This has dropped significantly, as you can see there. Households with dependent children who suffer tobacco smoke inside the home. This is from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, a major research public health body in Australia. They provide very good evidence. So you can see a significant drop there, decrease from 2001 to 2019 when the last survey was undertaken. And on the figure on the right there, you can see non-smoking adults exposed to tobacco smoke inside the family home. That's also decreasing over that period. So the figures are pointing in the right direction in terms of trends, in terms of good public health outcomes, in terms of addressing the market failure that I spoke about earlier and the externalities. And of course, waste management issues of cigarette butts that are thrown on the ground and waste management. So you can see that Australia's made some significantly positive change in reducing the incidence and prevalence and associated health issues of cigarette smoking. So in summary, I'd just like to state a summary of what we've done. We've talked about the rationale, cigarette tobacco control policy in Australia, why we do cigarette tobacco control policy, the associated burden of disease and illness that results from cigarette smoking, the evidence that supports why we need to have this policy in place. This is an overarching framework provided by the World Health Organization. Australia's response to that framework and Australia's response before that framework. If you remember those figures I showed from 1980, we were acting on this before the World Health Organization framework. So we were, in a sense, Australia was very much world leaders on this topic. The long-term generational outcomes of these changes. So that's what we've presented today. It's a very brief, that's a very quick overview, really, summary of Australia's policies on tobacco control in the last 40 years. I hope that informs you well of what we've done, and I hope Indonesia can follow that as well, but I can't really comment on that policy of Indonesian government around this, but that's what we've done in Australia. So I thank you for listening and your attention, and I wish you good health. And your good health, sehat selalu, especially if you don't smoke cigarettes. I'm sure you'll lead healthy lives if you don't smoke cigarettes and avoid cigarette smoking. And I wish you success in selamat dan success in everything you do. So that's a very short presentation on cigarette tobacco control policy in Australia. And I'll just open up the floor now to questions. If you have any questions, please. I'm happy to take any questions, but I can't really comment on Indonesia, but questions about Australia.
Ya, untuk teman-teman silakan jika ada yang mau bertanya, saya buka sesi tanya jawab. Mau pakai bahasa Indonesia boleh? Gimana Mas Edo? Silakan.
Itu berarti kalau ada sponsor tentang rokok langsung diblok ya kalau di Australia.
Yeah. So James, when the tobacco industry wants to support some fund, it's just like giving fund to any kind of events. Australia will directly block or refuse the fund. Is it correct?
Yes, that is correct. There is no allowance, or that's not permitted. No, tobacco policy, tobacco companies aren't permitted to provide sponsorship for any activity, sport or community development, social development. No, the tobacco companies aren't permitted to provide sponsorship of any kind. No. In Australia.
Jadi in Australia langsung diblok, nggak boleh. Okay, any questions? Ada yang nanya lagi? Silakan. Sorry, always mixing between English and Indonesia. Ya, mau tanya lagi boleh? It's really interesting. Yes. Please, James.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. It's really interesting that you are also like influence the tobacco control in Australia. One main factor of having the tobacco control, engaging the DALYs, disabilities adjusted life years, which is actually everyone in public health is rely on it. And if we have a problem on the disabilities, it's becoming a huge homework for the country to share or to support the cost. Is it right, James?
Sorry, dear, I don't quite follow your question. So
Yeah.
your question is?
Yeah. So actually, Australia prepared the tobacco control to support, the disabilities adjusted life years becoming decreased. I mean, it will be no one will have higher healthy cost, something like that. They would like to reduce the cost of from the pain of the community.
Yeah.
Because of the
Yes.
tobacco control. Yeah,
Oh,
because
yes,
the
that's correct.
tobacco
Yeah.
bring that one. Yeah.
Well, the DALYs, disability adjusted life years and quality adjusted life years, really help to guide public policy on matters, because we all see life as sacrosanct, as the sanctity of human life. We want to prolong it as best we can for as long as we can without suffering. And the number and what we estimate the minus of what we take from our life expectancy from risk behaviours such as cigarette smoking, the DALYs and the QALYs really help guide policy to reduce the burden of disease, so we can live longer. Secondly, governments, public in Australia, we have major fund, as you do in here in Indonesia. We have Medicare, which is similar to BPJS, and that's a very costly program. Excuse me, that's a very costly program, and the government, in terms of the business model, wants to control its costs. It has a responsibility around that on its own fiscal management side. There's a whole range of reasons why we want to reduce cigarette smoking, for the individual and for the benefit of society, and for economic reasons. There are many reasons why it holds. Now, the tobacco companies are very influential. They're large corporations, and it's always been a struggle. But as you can see in these public health outcomes, we have public policy has succeeded in prolonging life in this regard in relation to cigarette smoking.
Okay.
And addressing DALYs and QALYs.
Okay, yes. That's why actually the importance of from economics, health economics, to understand why the a lot of the health risk factors is influence to the DALYs. Yeah. Okay, thank you,
Yes.
James.
Yeah.
Other want to ask something? Ada yang mau tanya? Boleh lo pakai bahasa Indonesia, don't worry.
Okay, yeah.
Translator siap membantu. Menarik ya, kalau di Indonesia iklan rokok ya, aduh iklan rokok di mana-mana. Terus apalagi ya? Apa namanya? Sponsor beasiswa Jarum ya. In Indonesia itu banyak sekali. Sudah seperti itu, banyak anak-anak yang mereka itu merasa bahwa rokok adalah champion atau superhero karena mereka mensupport banyak kegiatan di kehidupan masing-masing, kehidupan kita. Nah, ini yang bahaya. Kalau di Australia sudah langsung dicoret gitu ya. Begitu ada rokok nggak masuk. Nah, ini rokok lagi nggak masuk lagi. Pokoknya coret langsung gitu oleh apa namanya? Government gitu ya. Oke. Yang paling menarik di situ. Oke, ada lagi yang mau tanya? Saya sedang cek satu persatu yang hadir. Ayo di open cam. Ada lagi? Boleh lo tanya lo. Nggak bayar, gratis. It's a free to ask to James. Especially about tobacco control in Australia. Bagaimana, ada yang shock nggak? Shock, wah kok berat ternyata ya gitu. Ada yang shock? Because it's really a new things from Indonesia, since we are not having this a tight policy, so everyone can smoke easily, and they smoke a lot.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right, dear. Indonesia isn't a signatory to the convention. Excuse me. So it has significant inroads yet to make, it seems, into tobacco control. But there are good positive signs in terms of smoke-free area regulation that we all experience now on the campus here at UMA, and in restaurants and cafes which have smoking and non-smoking areas. So the change is slowly occurring, yes, yeah, without this convention, but this convention will help speed things along, but I can't really comment more than that.
Okay, yeah. I think everyone is already agreed what Australia already done. I know that we are in the stage like 40, 50 years ago of Australia trying to do the tobacco control, but again, we are still gaining a lot of committed from the government and parliament, especially concerning tobacco control.
Yes, that Indonesia presently, it seems, to me, in my view, Indonesia is equivalent to Australia many years ago. Indonesia is a long way behind in tobacco control measures. Yeah, from what I've observed.
Yeah. But hopefully we can catch the great international policy framework. So Indonesia can also sign with the WHO and also can protect our community from a lot of disease, non-communicable disease, and becoming like Australia, healthy Australia. Amin.
Yes.
Okay, it seems that everyone is understand the tobacco control in Australia. Do you want to have the last final statement concerning the tobacco control in Australia, James, to be shared to the students?
I can provide you with my PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
That's not a problem. My only final comment is that we're very fortunate in Australia to have pursued tobacco control policy as we have. We've gone about tobacco control in a very strong way, in vigorous way, over many years, and it has led to significant change in terms of public health areas, in terms of smoke-free areas, in terms of health outcomes, and pricing, and the demand, the consumer demand side of it. We're very fortunate that Australia has pursued this very strongly over many years under progressive regimes. Yeah, we're all better for it. We're all much better for it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, James. And I hope that Indonesia can catch this opportunity, starting from our generations, from these students. They can be the people to promote the healthy behavior to all of the adults. Yeah. Thank you so much, James.